What's up guys, this is my 1998 two-door coupe. It's got a 2005 WRX engine swap, but the motor's got a blown head gasket. So I'm doing a build series on all the steps necessary to pull this motor and replace that head gasket. Thanks for checking out the video. I'm Luke, this is a Subaru-only show. You just kind of hook it in like that, right? Boom, and that's it. So today I'm going to continue with this build on step number 4, removing the radiator and the overflow tank. And to do that, I'm going to have to drain the coolant. I've actually had a couple videos already on this build series. In one of the first videos, I made this whiteboard where I talked about the 4 fundamental processes you go through when you pull an engine from a Subaru vehicle. In the next video, I made this whiteboard and I walked through 16 steps that are going to be required for me to go through when I pull this engine from this Subaru. And these are basically the 16 steps that anybody will have to go through when they pull a turbo flat 4 motor with a manual transmission out of a Subaru vehicle. Okay, I actually made a plan for step 4 and I have it right here behind me. Let's check it out. Okay, the first step is going to be remove the overflow tank. Then I'm going to drain all the coolant. Then I'm going to pull the upper and lower radiator hose. Then I'll unplug those electric fans. You got to do that before you pull this radiator. And then I'll remove the core support brackets. And actually on my Subaru, I only have one core support bracket, so I'll remove my single core support bracket, and that will be located on the top of the radiator. And then finally, the last step will be pull the radiator. And I'll show you guys how to do that. It's pretty easy. Once you remove everything else, you just slip it out the top and set it aside. Okay, let's get started. The first step is overflow tank. Okay, here's your overflow tank. Basically all you need to do is pull out this overflow hose. Try not to get it everywhere. And then depending on what style tank you'll either have a couple bolts right here, or like mine, you'll actually have a little clip right here, and I'll show you a close-up of that right now. Okay, for my overflow tank, I actually have this little clip right here. And you have to depress that clip to allow your overflow tank to slip out. And then you can pull that sucker out. Okay, let's see if I can get this sucker out. Okay, got it out. And this sucker definitely doesn't have coolant in it. That is water. Nasty. I'm going to dump that out right now because I know that's not coolant. Okay, and that's the coolant overflow tank. Let's go set that aside. I'm storing these parts under here for now. Now I'm going to clean all these later, but for now, I just want to get everything disassembled, and I'll clean everything at once at the end before I put it all back together. Make sure you get a nice organized place to put all your parts, and lay them down in an organized way so that they're placed in some kind of chronological order. That way when you go back to put everything together, it's pretty easy based on just where the parts are located on your shelf. Okay, we got the overflow tank done, check. Next is drain all the coolant. Okay, so how do you drain the coolant? Basically, to drain the coolant, you have a couple different ways. I like to drain it from the petcock that's on the bottom of the radiator on the passenger side. But a lot of times, that petcock is totally seized or non-functional. And in that case, you're just going to have to pull the lower radiator hose. You can pull it either from the engine side or the radiator side, whatever side's easier. But just know that when you pull that hose, it's going to spill all over the place, it's going to get all over your arm, and it's going to make a big mess. So if you can, use that petcock to drain that radiator first. That makes the whole process a whole lot cleaner. Now here's a tip, that petcock has a little fitting on it. You can put a little plastic hose over it, then use that plastic hose to drain all the coolant into your bucket. Now here's another quick tip. I actually use these 5-gallon buckets that I get from Home Depot or Ace Hardware. And I get the ones that have a lid with a rubber seal. That way you actually have a watertight seal with that lid. And I label them with different colored tape. So for coolant, I label it with blue tape and I say coolant only. I write that all the way around the perimeter of the bucket and I put on the lid right there, coolant. And I actually have a separate one of these buckets for oil, for differential fluid, and for coolant. They all have different colored tape and they're all dedicated to that fluid and they all have liquid tight seals. It works great and keeps all the odors down in your garage wherever you store these fluids while you accumulate them before you take them to get recycled. Okay, let's drain the coolant on this sucker. I'm going to start by seeing if that petcock is functional, and then I'll use this clear hose to drain the fluid from that petcock into my bucket. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, if you end up buying those silicone caps and plugs that I talked about earlier, you can use one of those caps and you can cut off the end. That way you can use this as a coupler. And this silicone material is really soft and flexible, so that's what I end up using as a coupler to connect that clear hose to the petcock drain port. And that cap just became a little coupler. Perfect. Okay, we're underneath the vehicle. Here's that petcock, and here's that little valve. So I'm actually going to be turning this little valve. Grab your little silicone adapter, grab your clear tubing, Put your silicone adapter over it. Put the other end over the port. Get your bucket in position, and then open that port. A lot of times when you unscrew the valve, you actually drain more coolant through the threads than the actual port. Don't worry about that. You can actually take that little port all the way out and let it drain through the thread port. So I've just removed that petcock completely, and that way all the coolant is able to drain through the threaded port. Another thing you want to be sure to do is actually take the cap off of your radiator. This will allow the coolant to drain a lot easier because it's not creating a vacuum in the system. Okay, while that is draining, we can actually start removing the upper radiator hose because the coolant level is already lower than that point. And then, after the system is completely drained, we'll remove the lower radiator hose. Okay, here's your upper radiator hose. Most of the clamps on these radiator hoses are either going to be 10 millimeters, like this traditional OEM clamp is, or if you have one of these aftermarket hose clamps, these are typically going to be 8 millimeters. All right, let's get this sucker off. A good nut driver makes this process a lot easier. For those of you who have never pulled off any of these radiator hoses, some of the time these suckers can get really seized on there after years of scale and all the heating cycles it's gone through. So even though you remove that hose clamp, this hose might be totally seized to that metal pipe. What I use is a big set of needle nose pliers that have smooth teeth on it. That way you can put that around the hose and you can actually spin the hose a little bit and loosen that bind. Another tool that helps is a big ass screwdriver. A lot of times you can get that behind the hose and use it for a little bit of leverage, push that sucker out. Okay, another thing that makes things easy is just to mark everything. Even though these radiator hoses are black, you can actually use a Sharpie. You can mark your upper radiator hose and your lower radiator hose. You can also mark the engine side and the radiator side of each hose. That way, when you grab these hoses at the end and put everything back together, you can check out those marks and you can figure out real easily where it needs to go. You don't have to worry about looking at old pictures or anything like that. Alright, I marked the upper hose, and then I put radiator for the radiator side of the hose, and engine for the engine side of the hose. I'll grab that sucker, I'll put that in here, store it for later. Okay, and we're done with draining the coolant, and we're in the process of pulling the hoses. Okay, here's your lower radiator hose. On the engine side, it connects to your thermostat housing, and on the radiator side, it connects right here. It looks like this one has one OEM hose clamp, which is 10 millimeter, and one aftermarket serrated hose clamp, which is 8 millimeters. If you can't get a nut driver in there, you might actually have to use a little ratchet and a socket on it. Don't forget to get a bucket, because there's definitely going to be some coolant left in that hose. Otherwise you're going to make a mess and spill all over the place. And let that drain before you take the hose all the way off. Put a little rag or a little piece of paper towel in that hole so you don't get any drips on you while you take that second half of the hose off. Alright, get the nut driver on this second hose clamp, the 8 millimeter. Always twist it first to break the seal and then pull. And there's our lower radiator hose. We'll clean it and take a closer look at it and evaluate whether or not we need to replace it before we put it back on the engine. Alright, going back to the checklist, we've pulled the hoses, you can check it off list. And next is unplugging those fans. Okay, we're back underneath the car and we're going to unplug these electric fans. There's actually going to be two plugs you have to disconnect. One on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. The one on the passenger side is located just above that petcock that we removed earlier. Okay, here's that plug. You're actually going to lift up on this little tang and then slide the plug out. Let's see if I can do that with you guys on camera. Lift it up. I'm lifting up with my thumb and then sliding out the bottom half. Boom, like that. Okay, so the passenger side one is unplugged now. The other one is actually going to be on the bottom of the radiator. Okay, here's the other plug, and it looks like this one's being held with a zip tie. So I'll bet that that tang was snapped off on this one because somebody didn't remove it properly. So I'll snip this with a pair of dikes, and then this one will be unplugged as well, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Boom, that one's done too. Okay, now those core support brackets are going to be located on top of your radiator core support. There's going to be one on each side, one on the driver's side, and one on the passenger side. On my car, the passenger side core support bracket is completely missing. But the driver's one is definitely here, and it's made out of some custom bracket that's rusting and looks all nasty, so I'm going to remove this sucker, and I'll probably never put it back on this car. I'll either get the original core support brackets, or I'll fabricate new ones, and I'll show you guys how I do that when I do it. Okay, step one is remove these custom zip ties that are not holding anything. I think that was probably for the hood prop. And then 12mm nut, or bolt rather. And that is my radiator core support bracket. It's definitely time to get this sucker off of this engine. All right, remove core support brackets, done. Next step, pull radiator. Needle nose pliers with the bent tips work great for removing these small little hose clamps. Then twist the hose to loosen the seal before you pull it off. On a lot of Subarus, that power steering hose is going to be in the way, so you either push it out of the way or you can remove it and just tuck it off to the side. Okay, once you're sure that you've disconnected all of your hoses, you've disconnected all those smaller secondary hoses, and then you've double checked that all of your electric fan plugs are disconnected, you can go ahead and start to remove that radiator. It should slide straight up without a problem. Add this to the stack of parts inside the shop. That's safe and out of the way, and we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, boom, we've pulled the radiator, and we're done with all those steps. That means we get to move back to the master list and knock another one off that list. Radiator and overflow is done. Next is the intake, top mount intercooler, and the pitch stop. Okay, and the mass airflow sensor is disconnected. Once you've cleared your throttle body and you've cleared your turbo, you should be good to lift that sucker on out. Now that I have it out, we can actually take a closer look at the design.